A little girl is humiliated at court by judge, unaware the girl was a genius. Welcome back and enjoy the story. Hazel was only 11 when everything collapsed. The classroom fell silent as the police officers entered, their heavy boots squeaking against the freshly waxed linoleum floor. Ms. Zweller, the principal, stood in the doorway, her thin lips pressed into a satisfied smile as she pointed directly at Hazel. The girl's small hands trembled as she gripped the edges of her desk, her extraordinary mind, capable of solving complex equations that baffled even her teachers, suddenly unable to comprehend what was happening. The officers approached, towering over her desk while 28 pairs of eyes stared in shock. "Hazel Kowalski," one officer said, his voice echoing in the silent room, "you need to come with us." Her classmates' whispers swelled behind her as she stood, her worn sneakers, the left one with a hole near the big toe that her grandmother had attempted to patch 3 times, barely making a sound as she walked between the officers. The hallway stretched before her like an endless tunnel, Ms. Weller's heels clicking rhythmically behind them, a soundtrack to Hazel's humiliation. "I didn't do anything," Hazel whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's what they all say," Ms. Zweller replied, not bothering to lower her voice. "But the evidence speaks for itself." Outside, rain fell in sheets, soaking through Hazel's thin jacket as the officers led her to the patrol car. Through the classroom windows, she could see her classmates pressed against the glass, their faces a blur behind the rain-streaked panes. In that moment, Hazel felt something inside her change, a hardening, a resolve forming in the pit of her stomach. This was injustice, and somehow she would prove it. The squad car door closed with a definitive thunk, sealing her away from everything familiar. As they pulled away from Lincoln Middle School, Hazel pressed her forehead against the cold window, watching as the brick building grew smaller in the distance. Her life, already hanging by threads since her mother's hospitalization and her father's disappearance years ago, was now completely unraveled. All she had left was her frail grandmother waiting at home, unaware that her brilliant granddaughter was being taken away in a police car for a crime she never committed. The rain continued to fall, mirroring the tears that Hazel refused to let slide down her cheeks. She wouldn't cry, not now, not when she needed her mind clear, because if there was one thing Hazel understood better than the advanced calculus problems she secretly solved at night, it was that the truth had a mathematical certainty to it, and somehow she would find the equation that would set her free. The juvenile detention center smelled of bleach and despair. Hazel sat alone in a small room, her feet dangling from a chair too tall for her small frame. Hours passed as she waited, her mind racing through possibilities, equations, solutions. She thought about her grandmother's weathered hands, how they would be ringing with worry by now. She thought about her mother, lying in a hospital bed 2 counties away, fighting a disease that the doctors said was progressing too rapidly. She thought about her father, whose face had begun to fade from her memory, leaving only the ghost of his smile and the echo of his laughter. When the door finally opened, a woman in a suit introduced herself as Ms. Patton, a public defender, assigned to Hazel's case. Her eyes were kind but tired, her briefcase overstuffed with papers that seemed ready to burst free at any moment. "Hazel, I'm here to help you," Ms. Patton said, setting down her briefcase and taking a seat across from her. "Can you tell me what happened today?" "Nothing happened," Hazel replied, her voice stronger now. "I was in class, helping Martin with a math problem, and then the police came." Ms. Patton nodded, making notes. "The accusation is serious, Hazel. Principal Zweller claims she found evidence that you've been stealing test answers and selling them to other students." Hazel's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's impossible. I've never—" "She says she has proof. Papers with future test questions found in your locker, along with money that she believes came from students paying for answers." A cold realization washed over Hazel. Those weren't stolen test answers. They were her own notes, problems she created to challenge herself because the regular curriculum was too easy. And the money, the meager savings she'd been collecting from odd jobs to help with her grandmother's medicine. "It's not what she thinks," Hazel began, desperation creeping into her voice. "Those are my own problems. I make them up because—" She stopped, remembering how admitting her advanced abilities had only ever brought her trouble, suspicion, and isolation. "Ms." Patton studied her closely. "Because you what, Hazel?" Hazel took a deep breath. "Because I need more. The math we do in class is too easy. I've been teaching myself from old textbooks I found at the library." A flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, or disbelief, crossed Miss Patton's face. "That's quite a claim. You're saying you create these complex problems yourself?" "Yes, and I can prove it." The following morning, Hazel stood before Judge Isaiah Thompson, a man whose stern demeanor and imposing presence made the courtroom feel even colder than it was. His bench loomed above her like a mountain, and his gaze peering down over half-moon. Spectacles seemed to have already determined her guilt. Ms. Zweller sat to one side, her posture rigid with self-righteousness, while Miss Patton stood beside Hazel, a shield that felt too thin against the weight of accusation. "Your Honor," Ms. Patton began, "my client denies all charges. She maintains that the papers found in her possession were not stolen test answers, but her own work." A murmur rippled through the small courtroom. Judge Thompson silenced it with a sharp rap of his gavel. "And we're to believe that an 11-year-old child is creating advanced mathematical problems on her own?" His tone dripped with skepticism. "Ms. Kowalski, do you take this court for fools?" Hazel felt her throat tighten, but she managed to speak. "No, Your Honor. I can show you." Judge Thompson leaned forward, his eyebrows raised. "Show me what?" "Exactly. Give me any math problem. I'll solve it right now." The judge exchanged glances with Ms. Zweller, whose smirk suggested she believed this bluff would quickly be called. "Your Honor," Ms. Zweller interjected, "this is clearly an attempt to distract from the serious nature of the charges. Hazel has a history of manipulative behavior." "I do not," Hazel protested, her voice cracking with emotion. "Enough," Judge Thompson commanded. He seemed to consider for a moment, then nodded to his clerk. "Mr. Reynolds has a degree in mathematics. Let him provide a problem." The clerk, a young man with kind eyes, hesitated only briefly before writing something on a legal pad and passing it to the bailiff, who brought it to Hazel. Hazel looked at the problem, a complex algebraic equation that would challenge most high school students. Relief washed over her. This was elementary compared to what she worked on at night. "May I have paper and a pencil, please?" she asked. The bailiff provided them, and Hazel began to work. The courtroom fell silent, except for the scratch of her pencil. Within minutes, she handed the solution back. Mr. Reynolds examined her work, his eyebrows rising steadily. He wrote another problem, more difficult this time. Again, Hazel solved it with ease. "Your Honor," Mr. Reynolds said finally, his voice filled with astonishment, "not only are her answers correct, but her methods show an understanding of mathematical principles far beyond her years." Judge Thompson frowned, clearly not having expected this outcome. "This proves nothing about the charges at hand." "If I may, Your Honor," Ms. Patton interjected, "if Hazel can create and solve such problems herself, it supports her claim that the papers found in her locker were her own work, not stolen test answers." The judge's frown deepened. "Ms. Zweller, did you personally compare these alleged stolen answers with actual test questions?" Ms. Zweller shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I saw complex mathematical notations that seemed beyond what would be taught in our curriculum." "So you assumed they were stolen without verification?" Judge Thompson pressed. I had reasonable suspicion," Ms. Zweller stammered. Judge Thompson turned his attention back to Hazel, studying her with new eyes. "Young lady, where did you learn such advanced mathematics?" Hazel stood straighter, gathering courage from the validation of her abilities. "My grandfather taught me the basics before he died. After that, I taught myself from books. The public library has a good mathematics section." Something in the judge's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "And the money found in your locker?" "It's mine," Hazel replied. "I've been saving it for my grandmother's medicine. She's all I have while my mother is in the hospital." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Thompson removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose as he considered the situation before him. "Mrs. Weller," he said finally, "it appears you've made a grave error in judgment. Without substantial evidence, you've subjected this child to unnecessary trauma and humiliation." His voice hardened. This court does not look kindly on such actions. Ms. Dweller's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Your Honor, I was only following protocol for suspected academic dishonesty. Protocol does not supersede common sense or due diligence, the judge interrupted sharply. This case is dismissed. Ms. Kowalski is to return to school with a full apology from the administration. Relief flooded through Hazel, but it was quickly tempered by the knowledge that she would have to return to the same school, face the same principal who had tried to destroy her. As if reading her thoughts, Judge Thompson added, "Furthermore, I'm ordering an evaluation of Ms. Kowalski's academic abilities by the District Education Board. It's clear she requires more challenging material than her current placement provides." For the first time since the police had entered her classroom, Hazel felt a spark of hope ignite within her chest, not just for vindication, but for the possibility that her mind might finally find the challenges it craved. As the courtroom began to clear, Judge Thompson called out, "Ms. Kowalski, a moment, please." Hazel approached the bench, her legs still, shaky with relief. The judge leaned down, his voice low. "I owe you an apology as well. I made assumptions about you that were unfair." Hazel nodded, unsure how to respond to an adult admitting they were wrong. It was an experience foreign to her young life. "Never hide that brilliant mind of yours," Judge Thompson continued. "The world needs more people who can see solutions where others see only problems." As Hazel left the courtroom, the rain had stopped, and weak sunshine broke through the clouds. Ms. Patton walked her to where her grandmother waited, having been brought to the courthouse by a kind neighbor. The old woman's eyes were red from crying, but her face transformed with joy at the sight of her granddaughter. Hazel ran into her grandmother's arms, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and baking bread that somehow always clung to her, even on the worst days. Over her grandmother's shoulder, she could see Ms. Dweller leaving the courthouse, her back rigid with wounded pride. In that moment, Hazel made a promise to herself. She would use her gift not just to solve equations, but to solve bigger problems. Problems of injustice, of systems that failed people like her and her grandmother. Someday she would make sure no other child had to stand alone against adults who abused their power. But for now she would go home, help her grandmother prepare dinner, and continue her secret studies by the light of a reading lamp long after her grandmother had gone to sleep. Because Hazel Kowalski had work to do, important work that couldn't wait for the world to recognize her genius. If you're enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing. The next morning, Hazel hesitated at the entrance to Lincoln Middle School, her hand clutching the straps of her backpack so tightly her knuckles had turned white. News of her courtroom triumph had spread quickly through the small community, transforming her overnight from the quiet, odd girl in patched clothes to something of a local curiosity. She could feel the stares as she walked through the hallway, a mixture of awe, confusion, and in some cases, resentment. Mrs. Weller was conspicuously absent. A substitute principal, Mr. Garrison, had been appointed temporarily while the school board conducted its investigation into the incident. He had greeted Hazel at the door with awkward formality, clearly instructed to treat her with care, but unsure exactly how to interact with the girl who had humiliated his predecessor. Hazel slid into her seat in homeroom, keeping her eyes fixed on her desk. The whispers around her were like static electricity, raising the hairs on her arms. "Is it true you solved college math in court? I heard she made the judge cry. My mom says Principal Zweller might get fired." Hazel tried to block out the voices, focusing instead on the comforting precision of the clock on the wall, counting seconds with its rhythmic ticking. Math was like that. Reliable, consistent, a language that didn't change based on who was speaking it. Martin, the classmate she had been helping when everything fell apart, slid into the seat beside her. Unlike the others, his face showed no awe or suspicion, only genuine concern. "Are you okay?" he asked simply. Hazel nodded, grateful for the normalcy of his question. "I'm fine." "What you did was really brave," Martin continued, his voice low, "standing up to grown-ups like that." Before Hazel could respond, their teacher, Mrs. Wilson, called the class to attention. She was a plump woman with kind eyes that had always noticed when Hazel finished her work early or when she came to school without lunch. Today those eyes held a new respect as they met Hazel's. "Class, we have a special announcement," Mrs. Wilson said. "Hazel will be participating in a special academic evaluation next week. Until then, she'll continue with us, but will also spend some time with Mr. Lancaster from the district office, who will be assessing her mathematical abilities." A few students groaned jealously at what they perceived as special treatment. Hazel sank lower in her seat, wishing for the millionth time that she could just be invisible. After class, Mrs. Wilson asked Hazel to stay behind. Once the room had emptied, she closed the door and sat at the desk next to Hazel's, something teachers rarely did. "I want to apologize," Mrs. Wilson said, surprising Hazel. "I knew you were gifted. I saw it in your work, in the way you would finish problems before I'd even finished explaining them. I should have done more to challenge you, to advocate for you." Hazel blinked, unsure how to respond to this unexpected confession. "Why didn't you?" she finally asked, genuine curiosity overriding her usual reticence. Mrs. Wilson sighed, her face showing a complex mixture of shame and regret. "Fear, I suppose. Mrs. Weller didn't appreciate teachers who went against her way of doing things. And to be honest, I wasn't sure how to help someone as exceptional as you. But that's no excuse." She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a book. "This is from my personal collection. It might be a bit more challenging than what you're used to." Hazel accepted the book, Advanced Differential Equations, running her fingers over the worn cover with reverence. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the book to her chest. "There's a world waiting for that mind of yours, Hazel," Mrs. Wilson said softly. "Don't let what happened hold you back. And know that not all adults are like Mrs. Weller. Some of us are on your side." That afternoon, Mr. Lancaster arrived from the district office. He was a tall man with wire-rimmed glasses and a bow tie that seemed perpetually crooked. He set up in an empty classroom and invited Hazel to join him after her regular classes. "So," he said once they were seated across from each other, "I hear you've been teaching yourself mathematics beyond your grade level." Hazel nodded cautiously, still wary of authority figures after her recent experience. "Would you mind showing me what you've been working on? Whatever interests you most right now." Hazel hesitated, then pulled out a notebook from her backpack. Its pages were filled with equations and proofs, some crossed out and reworked multiple times. She handed it to Mr. Lancaster, who began to flip through it, his eyebrows rising higher with each page. "Hazel," he said after several minutes of silence, "do you understand what you're doing here? This is university-level work." "I know," she replied simply, "but there are still mistakes. I can't quite get the proof on page 17 to work correctly." Mr. Lancaster turned to page 17 and studied it intently. "That's because you're attempting to solve a problem that has stumped mathematicians for years. It's part of a set of problems related to number theory that remain unsolved." Hazel's eyes widened. "Oh, I thought I was just doing something wrong." A smile broke across Mr. Lancaster's face, the first genuine smile Hazel had seen from an adult at school in a long time. "No, Hazel, you're doing something extraordinary. You're asking questions that need asking." Over the next 2 hours, they talked mathematics, really talked, in a way Hazel had never experienced before. Mr. Lancaster didn't talk down to her or simplify concepts. He spoke to her as an equal, challenging her ideas, offering new perspectives, suggesting resources she hadn't discovered yet. When their session ended, Mr. Lancaster packed up his materials with a thoughtful expression. "I'll need to make my recommendations to the board, but I think we both know you need more than Lincoln Middle School can provide." Hazel's heart sank. "I can't leave. My grandmother needs me close by, and my mother. When she gets out of the hospital, she'll expect me to be here." Mr. Lancaster nodded understanding. "There are other options, independent study programs, mentorships, even early college courses that wouldn't require you to change schools. We'll figure something out." As Hazel walked home that afternoon, her mind buzzed with possibilities. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where her intellect was an asset, not something to hide. where she could ask questions without fear of standing out, where she could explore the furthest reaches of mathematics and beyond. The small apartment she shared with her grandmother was on the third floor of a weathered building that had once been grand, but now sagged with age and neglect. The elevator had been broken for months, so Hazel climbed the stairs, her legs aching by the time she reached their door. Inside, her grandmother was seated at their small kitchen table, her gnarled hands sorting through a pile of mail with trembling fingers. When she saw Hazel, her face brightened, the deep wrinkles around her eyes crinkling with her smile. "There's my girl," she said in Polish-accented English. "How was school today?" Hazel set down her backpack and kissed her grandmother's cheek. "Different. Better, I think." "Good, good. And look, we have a letter from your mama today." Hazel's heart leapt. Letters from her mother were rare treasures. The experimental treatments she was undergoing left her too exhausted to write often, and phone calls to the hospital were expensive luxuries they couldn't afford. She took the envelope from her grandmother's hands, carefully opening it to preserve every bit of connection to her absent mother. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in her mother's delicate handwriting. "My dearest Hazel, the nurses told me what happened at your school. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there for you, but so proud of how brave you were. Your grandfather always said you had his mind and my heart. What a powerful combination that. So the doctors say the new treatment is showing promise. I'm feeling stronger each day and dreaming of the moment I can hold you in my arms again. It won't be long now, I promise. Until then, keep shining your brilliant light. Don't dim it for anyone, not even for a moment. The world needs your mind, Hazel, perhaps now more than ever. All my love. Mama." Hazel read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the small box where she kept all her mother's correspondence. Her throat felt tight with emotion, but also with a new sense of purpose. That night, after helping her grandmother prepare a simple dinner of cabbage soup and bread, Hazel sat at their small kitchen table with her homework. She finished her regular assignments in minutes, then turned to Mrs. Wilson's advanced textbook. Losing herself in the elegant complexity of differential equations, her grandmother watched her from her armchair, where she was knitting a scarf for the coming winter. "You look like him when you concentrate like that," she said softly. "Your grandfather, same furrow between the eyebrows." Hazel looked up, touched by the comparison. Her grandfather had been a mathematics professor in Poland before political unrest forced the family to flee to America, with little more than the clothes on their backs. He had died when Hazel was 7, but not before recognizing and nurturing the same spark in her that had driven his own studies. "I wish he could. See what I'm learning now," Hazel said. Her grandmother's eyes shimmered with tears and pride. "Oh, my Hazel, he sees. Trust an old woman who knows these things, he sees." The following week brought dramatic changes. The school board concluded its investigation, resulting in Ms. Zwella's resignation and a formal apology to Hazel and her grandmother. Mr. Lancaster's evaluation led to an unprecedented arrangement. Hazel would continue attending Lincoln Middle School for most subjects, but 3 afternoons a week she would travel to Westridge Community College to study advanced mathematics under the guidance of Professor Diana Iverson, a renowned mathematician, who had volunteered to mentor Hazel after hearing her story. The first time Hazel set foot on the college campus, she felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. The building seemed impossibly grand, the students impossibly adult as they hurried between classes with purpose and confidence. Professor E. Iverson met her at the mathematics building entrance, a tall woman with silver-streaked black hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "You must be Hazel," she said, offering her hand. "I've been looking forward to meeting the young mathematician who's causing such a stir." Hazel shook her hand, surprised by the professor's firm grip and direct gaze. "I'm not trying to cause a stir," she said honestly. Professor Iverson laughed, a warm sound that immediately put Hazel at ease. The best mathematicians rarely do. They're too busy asking what if and why not to worry about stirring things up. But stir things up they inevitably do. "Come, let me show you where we'll be working." She led Hazel to a small office lined with bookshelves that sagged under the weight of mathematical texts. A window overlooked a courtyard where students lounged on the grass, reading or talking in animated groups. "This will be your space while you're here," Professor Iverson explained. "My office is just next door if you need me, but I've found that young minds often do their best work when given room to explore independently." Hazel ran her fingers along the spines of the books, hardly able to believe her good fortune. "I can use any of these. All of them. Knowledge isn't meant to be locked away, Hazel. It's meant to be shared, questioned, expanded upon." Over. The next few hours, Professor Iverson assessed Hazel's knowledge, not with standard tests but through conversation, through problems posed and solutions debated. By the end, she was looking at Hazel with an expression the girl couldn't quite decipher. "You know," Professor Iverson said finally, "in my 30 years of teaching, I've encountered perhaps 3 students with your level of natural mathematical intuition, and none of them were 11 years old." Hazel felt her cheeks warm at the praise. "I just see patterns, connections that make sense." That's exactly what mathematics is, the science of patterns. And you, Hazel Kowalski, see patterns that others miss. The professor leaned forward, her expression serious. "Which is why we need to discuss where we go from here. Your talents need nurturing, structure, challenge." "What does that mean?" Hazel asked, a flicker of worry in her chest. "I told Mr. Lancaster I can't leave my school completely. My grandmother—" "I understand your concerns," Professor Iverson interrupted gently, "and I respect them. Family comes first, but there's an opportunity I'd like you to consider." She explained that each year, the National Science Foundation sponsored a small group of exceptional young mathematicians to participate in an intensive summer program. The program would provide not only advanced instruction, but also a stipend that could help with Hazel's family's financial situation. "The application deadline was 2 months ago," Professor Iverson continued, "but given the exceptional circumstances, they've agreed to consider you for this year's cohort, if you're interested." Hazel thought of her mother's letter, her encouragement, to keep shining her light. She thought of her grandfather, who had sacrificed everything to give his family a chance at a better life in America. She thought of her grandmother, who despite her own hardships never failed to support Hazel's dreams. "Yes," she said firmly, "I'm interested." That evening, as Hazel helped her grandmother prepare dinner, she described her day at the college, the books, Professor Iverson, and the summer program opportunity. "But I won't go if you need me here," she finished, stirring the pot of stew on their ancient stove. "You're more important." Her grandmother set down the knife she'd been using to chop onions and turned to face Hazel fully, her lined face serious. "Hazel Kowalski, listen to me. Your mother and I didn't sacrifice all these years for you to turn down opportunities out of worry for us. This old woman has survived wars, immigration, the loss of her husband. I can certainly manage a summer while you pursue your education. But your medication and the rent, the stipend will help," her grandmother interrupted firmly. "And I'm not so helpless as you think. Mrs. Vasquez downstairs has been asking me to teach her traditional Polish cooking for months. Perhaps it's time I became a cooking instructor." The image of her serious grandmother teaching their exuberant, downstairs neighbor how to make pierogi made Hazel smile despite her concerns. "You're sure?" Her grandmother cupped Hazel's face in her weathered hands. "In life, opportunities knock only so many times before they move on to another door. When they knock for you, my brilliant girl, you must answer." Later that night, Hazel sat at their kitchen table, working on the application for the summer program. The questions were challenging, requiring her to explain her approach to mathematics, her goals, her vision for how mathematical principles could be applied to real-world problems. As she wrote, Hazel found herself thinking not just about abstract equations and elegant proofs, but about systems of education that failed to recognize non-traditional talent, systems of justice that made assumptions based on appearance or status, systems of healthcare that left families like hers struggling to afford necessary treatments. Mathematics was about patterns, yes, but it was also about solutions. And perhaps the most important problems awaiting her solutions weren't in textbooks at all, but in the very fabric of the society around her. What will tomorrow bring? Will Hazel's newfound academic opportunity lead to greater challenges, or Will the systems she's beginning to question push back against her rising brilliance? As the threads of her exceptional mind begin to weave a new pattern, one question remains. How far can a girl with nothing but her intellect and determination truly go? The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change. Hazel's application to the summer program was accepted with enthusiastic praise from the selection committee. At Lincoln Middle School, she continued her regular classes, but with supplemental work provided by her teachers, who now watched her, with a mixture of caution and fascination. And 3 times a week, she entered the world of Westridge Community College, where Professor Iverson pushed her mathematical abilities to new heights. One Tuesday afternoon, as Hazel was leaving the Python College campus, she noticed a familiar car parked near the entrance, Judge Thompson's black sedan. The judge himself stood beside it, apparently waiting for her. "Ms. Kowalski," he called as she approached. "May I have a word?" Hazel stopped, clutching her backpack straps tightly. Despite his ultimate fairness in her case, the memory of standing before his bench, feeling small and powerless, still lingered. "Don't worry," he said, noting her hesitation. "This is purely unofficial. I've been following your progress through Mr. Lancaster. Quite remarkable by all accounts." "Thank you," Hazel replied cautiously. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "I wanted to see how you were faring after everything, and to offer something if you're interested." He explained that his wife, Dr. Thompson, was a civil rights attorney who specialized in educational equity cases. She had read about Hazel's case in the local paper and had been deeply troubled by the systemic failures it represented. "She's starting a new initiative," Judge Thompson continued, "a program to identify and support gifted students from disadvantaged backgrounds to ensure they receive appropriate educational opportunities regardless of their circumstances. She was hoping you might consider being a consultant of sorts." Hazel frowned. "A consultant? But I'm just a student." "A student with first-hand experience of how these systems fail," the judge corrected gently. "Your perspective would be invaluable in designing a program that truly addresses the needs of students like yourself." The irony wasn't lost on Hazel, being asked to help by the same system that had so recently failed her. And yet, wasn't this exactly what she had been thinking about? The opportunity to effect change from within. "I'd need to discuss it with my grandmother," she said finally. "And it can't interfere with my schoolwork or my time at the college." Judge Thompson nodded. "Of course. Dr. Thompson would work around your schedule. She's quite flexible." As Hazel walked home, her mind buzzed with conflicting thoughts. Part of her wanted nothing more to do with authorities and systems that had proven untrustworthy. Another part recognized the rare opportunity being offered, a chance to help prevent what happened to her from happening to others. By the time she reached their apartment building, the spring afternoon had turned cool, a reminder that despite recent events, time continued its steady march forward. She climbed the stairs slowly, mentally preparing to present this new development to her grandmother in a way that wouldn't worry her. She found her grandmother not alone, but seated at their kitchen table with Mrs. Vasquez from downstairs. Between them lay a pile of dough and various filling ingredients, the beginnings of what appeared to be the promised cooking lesson. "Ah, there she is," Mrs. Vasquez exclaimed, her vibrant energy filling the small apartment. "Your Babsia is a miracle worker, Hazel. These hands," she held up her own flour-covered fingers, "have never created anything so delicious." Hazel's grandmother smiled, the expression transforming her tired face. "Nonsense, you are a natural, Teresa. Now tell us about your day, Hazel." Hazel set down her backpack and joined them at the table, automatically reaching for a piece of dough to help shape the pierogi. As she worked, she told them about her day at school, her session with Professor Iverson, and finally, the unexpected encounter with Judge Thompson. Mrs. Vasquez whistled low. "That's some opportunity, Chica, a chance to fix the system from the inside." "That's what I was thinking," Hazel admitted. "But is it wrong to work with people who were part of what happened to me?" Her grandmother's hands stilled their work. "Hazel, listen. In the old country, I learned an important lesson. Change rarely comes from complete outsiders. It comes from those who understand the system well enough to know where it breaks. where it bends, where it can be reshaped. Mrs. Vasquez nodded agreement. Your Babsia is wise. And think of it this way. Who better to help other kids like you than someone who's walked in those shoes? Later that evening, after Mrs. Vasquez had departed with a container of fresh pierogi and promises to return for another lesson, Hazel called the number Judge Thompson had given her. Doctor. Sophia Thompson answered on the second ring, her voice warm and direct as she explained her vision for the Educational Equity Initiative. What we're missing is the student perspective, Dr. Thompson explained. We have educators, legal experts, child psychologists, but none of us have actually experienced what it's like to be a gifted child navigating these systems today. I want to help, Hazel said, surprised by the conviction in her own voice. But I need to know that real change will happen, not just reports and recommendations that get filed away. Dr. Thompson's laugh was appreciative. Isaiah said you wouldn't pull punches. Good. We need that directness. And yes, this initiative has teeth, funding, political support, and a 3-year implementation plan. It's not just talk. By the time they ended the call, Hazel felt a strange mixture of hope and trepidation. Dr. Thompson had outlined a vision that aligned remarkably with thoughts Hazel herself had been having, a comprehensive program that would identify gifted students early, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds, and provide them with individualized support without removing them from their communities. We'll start with a pilot program here in the county, Dr. Thompson had explained, and if successful, we hope to expand statewide within 3 years. Your input would shape everything from identification methods to support structures. Hazel had agreed to attend a planning meeting the following week, pending her grandmother's approval and school schedule. As she hung up the phone, she found her grandmother watching her with an expression of quiet pride. You're going to help them, aren't you? Her grandmother asked. I think so, Hazel replied. If it works, it could help kids like me, kids who don't fit the usual expectations. Her grandmother nodded, reaching out to smooth Hazel's unruly curls. This is how change happens, Mała Dzieniuszka, one brave person at a time. The following day at school, Hazel noticed a new student in her homeroom, a thin boy with serious eyes and clothes almost as worn as her own. Mrs. Wilson introduced him as Isaac Reynolds, recently moved from a neighboring district. She assigned him the empty desk next to Hazel's. Hazel, would you mind showing Isaac around today? Mrs. Wilson asked. Help him get acclimated. Hazel nodded, though social interaction with peers remained her greatest challenge. Numbers made sense. People were far more complex and unpredictable. As the class settled into their morning routine, Isaac leaned slightly toward Hazel. You're the math genius, aren't you? He whispered. The one who proved the principle wrong. Hazel tensed, waiting for the mockery that usually followed such recognition, but Isaac's expression held only genuine curiosity. I'm good at math, she acknowledged cautiously. Not a genius. Isaac's mouth quirked in a half-smile. My dad says genius is just paying better attention than everyone else. He's the court clerk. He saw what you did that day. Realization dawned on Hazel. Mr. Reynolds is your father, the one who gave me the problems to solve? Isaac nodded. He couldn't stop talking about it. Said you solved stuff that took him years to master. A warm feeling spread through Hazel's chest at this indirect praise. Your dad was kind. A lot of adults weren't. Adults suck sometimes, Isaac agreed with a shrug. My old school, the teachers just wanted me to sit down and shut up. Didn't matter that I'd already read the whole textbook in the first week. Hazel studied him with new interest. You're ahead too. In some things. History, literature. Not math, though. Numbers and I have a complicated relationship. He grinned, and for the first time Hazel felt she might have found someone who understood what it was like to be different, to see the world through a lens that others didn't share. At lunch, they sat together at an empty table, comparing notes on their experiences as outliers in a system designed for conformity. Isaac had moved 6 times in his 11 years, following his father's career as he worked his way up from administrative assistant to court clerk. His mother was a nurse working night shifts, which meant he was often responsible for getting himself to and from school. "It's not so bad," he said when Hazel expressed sympathy. "I get to be independent. No one telling me what to do all the time." "I understand," Hazel said, thinking of her own responsibilities at home. "My grandmother tries, but she needs help too, so we help each other." As the afternoon classes began, Hazel found herself explaining concepts to Isaac that the rest of the class had covered weeks earlier. To her surprise, she enjoyed the teaching role, finding ways to connect mathematical principles to Isaac's literary mind, using metaphor and narrative to bridge the gap between their different types of intelligence. By the end of the day, the framework of a friendship had begun to form, tentative still but promising. As they gathered their belongings from their lockers, Isaac asked, "So what's next for the math prodigy? Solving world hunger through equations?" Though his tone was light, the question struck Hazel as surprisingly perceptive. "Actually," she said slowly, "I've been thinking about systems, how they work, why they fail, how they could be better." Isaac's eyebrows rose with interest. "Systems like school or bigger? All of them. Education, justice, healthcare." She thought of her mother, fighting for her life in a hospital that charged more for a week's stay than her family made in a year. "They're all connected and they're all broken somehow." Isaac nodded thoughtfully. "My dad says the same thing about the courts, that they're designed to work a certain way, but people mess them up with their biases and shortcuts." "Exactly," Hazel said, excited to be understood. "But what if we could redesign them, make them more, I don't know, fair, efficient?" "That," Isaac said with unexpected seriousness, "sounds like something the world really needs. Way more than another mathematical proof that only 10 people on the planet understand." His words stayed with Hazel that night as she worked on problems Professor Iverson had assigned. The elegance of pure mathematics had always been her refuge, a perfect world where answers existed if only one was clever enough to find them. But increasingly she found herself drawn to applied mathematics, to game theory, to systems analysis, to the complex modeling of human behavior and institutional structures. The following week brought the meeting with Dr. Thompson's initiative team. Held in a conference room at the local community center, the gathering included educators, legal experts, a child psychologist, and 2 school board members, one of whom, Hazel was startled to realize, was Mr. Lancaster. Dr. Thompson introduced Hazel with a respect that made the adults in the room sit up straighter, paying attention despite her youth. "Hazel's experience highlights exactly the failures we're trying to address," she explained. "She's here not as a subject of study, but as our most important advisor." For the next 2 hours, Hazel listened as the team outlined their preliminary plans, occasionally offering her perspective when asked. Much of the discussion involved educational jargon and legal considerations that went over her head. But the core issues were clear enough: how to identify gifted students who didn't fit traditional models, how to provide them with appropriate challenges while keeping them connected to their communities, how to ensure that socioeconomic factors didn't determine educational opportunities. Near the end of the meeting, Dr. Thompson turned to Hazel. "We've done a lot of talking, but I'm curious, if you could redesign your own educational experience from the beginning, what would it look like?" The room fell silent, all eyes on Hazel. She took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. "First, recognize that different isn't deficient," she began. "I was quiet, so teachers assumed I wasn't engaged. I finished work quickly, so they thought I was rushing or cheating. No one considered that I might be ahead until I was forced to prove it." Heads nodded around the table, some with guilty expressions suggesting they'd made similar assumptions in their careers. "Second, challenge matters more than advancement. Skipping grades isn't always the answer. It just puts kids with older students who might not accept them socially. Instead, provide depth within each grade level," she continued, gathering confidence as she spoke. "Third, support the whole family. My grandmother struggles to help with my advanced work. She's brilliant in her own way, but she didn't have these educational opportunities. Provide resources for families too." As she outlined her vision, a flexible, personalized approach that recognized multiple types of giftedness and provided tailored support. Hazel noticed Mr. Lancaster making rapid notes, while Dr. Thompson watched her with an expression of growing respect and excitement. And finally, Hazel concluded, listen to the kids. We know when we're bored or overwhelmed or misunderstood, but many of us have learned it's safer to stay quiet, to hide what makes us different. Create safe ways for us to speak up. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment before erupting in discussion, with team members eagerly incorporating her suggestions into their planning. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Thompson pulled Hazel aside. "That was extraordinary," she said quietly. "You've given us direction that would have taken months of research to discover." Hazel flushed with pride. "I just told you what I wish had been different for me." "Sometimes that's the most valuable perspective of all, Doctor," Thompson replied. "Now I have a proposal for you. This initiative needs ongoing student input, not just from you, but from others with similar experiences. Would you be willing to help us form a student advisory council? You would co-chair with me, helping to recruit other gifted students and ensuring their voices are integrated into every aspect of our program development." The offer was unexpected and somewhat overwhelming. I'm not a leader," Hazel stammered. "I don't know how to do something like that." Dr. Thompson smiled. "Leaders aren't born, Hazel. They're made through opportunity and necessity. And sometimes the best leaders are those who never sought the role, but stepped up because they saw a need." On her way home, Hazel's mind whirled with possibilities. A student advisory council would mean more responsibility, more demands on her already stretched time. But it would also mean a chance to create real lasting change, to build a system that worked not just for her, but for all the other Hazels out there, struggling to fit into educational models that weren't designed for minds like theirs. The apartment was dark when she arrived, which was unusual. Her grandmother was always home by this hour preparing their simple dinner. A note on the kitchen table explained her absence. At Mrs. Vasquez's apartment, her grandson Julian needs math help, leftovers in fridge, love Babsia. Hazel smiled at this new development. Her grandmother, it seemed, was finding her own ways to contribute, leveraging her cooking skills and her connection to Hazel's abilities to forge new community bonds. She had just heated the leftover pierogi when the phone rang. Expecting her grandmother, she was surprised to hear Professor Iverson's voice instead. "Hazel, I hope I'm not disturbing your evening," the professor began, an unusual excitement in her tone. "But I've just received news that couldn't wait until our next session." She explained that Hazel's work on an unsolved problem, one she'd been tackling as a recreational exercise between their formal lessons, had attracted attention. Hazel hadn't solved the problem completely, but her approach offered a new perspective that had excited several of Professor Iverson's colleagues. "The National Mathematics Conference has a special session for emerging talents," Professor Iverson continued. "They've invited you to present your work. It's an extraordinary honor, especially for someone your age." Hazel's hand tightened on the phone. "Present? You mean speak in front of people?" "Yes, mathematicians from across the country, along with educators and industry representatives interested in nurturing new talent." The thought of standing before an audience of experts made Hazel's stomach clench with anxiety. Numbers were safe, people were not. And yet, wasn't this another opportunity to challenge herself, to grow beyond the limitations she'd accepted for so long? "When is it?" she asked finally. 3 months from now in Chicago. All expenses would be covered by the conference, and I would accompany you, of course." Chicago, a city she'd only seen in books and on television, far from the small apartment where her grandmother waited for her each day, far from the hospital where her mother fought her slow battle against disease. "Can I think about it?" Hazel asked. "Of course, but not too long. They need to finalize the program within the week." After hanging up, Hazel sat at the kitchen table, her dinner forgotten as she weighed this new opportunity against her fears and responsibilities. Chicago meant leaving her grandmother alone, even if just for a few days. It meant standing before strangers, exposing not just her mind but herself to public scrutiny. It meant stepping into a spotlight she'd spent most of her life avoiding. Yet it also meant recognition of her work, validation of her abilities on a national stage. It meant connections to people who might further her education, provide resources she and her family desperately needed. It meant doors opening that had previously seemed permanently closed. The sound of keys in the lock interrupted her thoughts. Her grandmother entered, looking more energized than Hazel had seen her in months. "Oh, you found the food. Good, good," she said, hanging up her worn coat. "That Julian, he has a good mind for numbers once you explain things the right way." Mrs. Vasquez was so grateful, she insisted I take home some of her tamales for tomorrow. Hazel helped her grandmother into her favorite chair, bringing her a cup of the herbal tea she drank each evening for her arthritis. "You were teaching him math?" Her grandmother waved a dismissive hand. "Nothing like what you do. Just the basics he's struggling with in school." But it felt good to help. She studied, Hazel's face with the perception that came from a lifetime of reading subtle cues. "Something has happened, tell me." Hazel explained both of the day's developments, Dr. Thompson's invitation to co-chair the Student Advisory Council, and Professor Iverson's news about the mathematics conference. "Chicago," her grandmother exclaimed, her eyes wide. "My brilliant girl presenting to mathematicians. Your grandfather would burst with pride." "But it means leaving you alone," Hazel said, voicing her deepest concern. "And what if something happens with Mama while I'm gone?" Her grandmother reached for her hand, squeezing it firmly despite the swollen joints that made such movements painful. "Hazel, listen to me. Your mother and I have one dream, to see you become everything you can be. Not limited by poverty or circumstance or fear. These opportunities," her voice broke slightly, "these are what we prayed for. But, no buts. Mrs. Vasquez has already offered to check on me daily in exchange for Polish cooking lessons. And your mother is stable. The doctors say the new treatment is working slowly but surely." Her grandmother's eyes, though filmed with cataracts, shone with determination. "You will accept both offers, the council, the conference, and whatever else comes your way, promise me." Faced with such fierce maternal certainty, Hazel could only nod. "I promise." That night, as she worked through the latest set of problems, from Professor Iverson, Hazel felt a strange sense of her life dividing into before and after. Before the false accusation that had nearly derailed her future, and after when a series of doors began to open, leading her toward a horizon she'd never dared to imagine. The math still came easily, elegant solutions revealing themselves to her with the same clarity they always had. But now, alongside the pure pleasure of numerical patterns, she found herself thinking about applications, about how these abstract principles might translate into systems that could help real people navigate real challenges. She thought about Isaac, whose different kind of intelligence offered perspectives she'd never considered. About Julian, struggling with basic math, but perhaps gifted in ways no one had yet recognized. About her grandmother, whose wisdom and resilience represented a form of genius that would never be measured by standardized tests or academic credentials. And she thought about her mother, fighting her own battle far away, believing in Hazel's potential even when separated by distance and disease. "I won't let you down," Hazel whispered to the empty room, a promise to all of them and to herself, "any of you." The next 3 months passed in a whirlwind of activity. Hazel's days were filled with regular classes, advanced work with Professor Iverson, meetings with Dr. Thompson's initiative team, and preparation for her presentation at the mathematics conference. Evenings were devoted to homework, to helping her grandmother, and increasingly to the small group of different thinkers she and Isaac had begun to gather. It had started innocently enough, Isaac introducing her to Mei Lin, a quiet girl from his literature class who read at a college level but struggled with math and social interactions. Then came Zach, whose hyperactivity masked a brilliant but unfocused mind that saw connections others missed. Julian, Mrs. Vasquez's grandson, joined them too, bringing artistic talents that transformed complex concepts into visual representations everyone could understand. They met twice weekly at the public library, ostensibly to study together, but increasingly to discuss their experiences as outliers in the educational system. When Dr. Thompson heard about the group, she immediately suggested them as the core of the Student Advisory Council, providing them with resources and a formal structure for their discussions. "You've created exactly what we hoped to build," she told Hazel during one of their planning sessions. "A community of diverse talents supporting each other." Hazel hadn't thought of it that way. She'd simply been following her instinct to connect with peers who understood what it meant to be different, to create a space where they could all be fully themselves without fear of judgment. As the date of the mathematics conference approached, however, Hazel's anxiety began to mount. Professor Iverson arranged for her to practice her presentation before a small audience of faculty and advanced students at Westridge Community College, an experience that left her sweating and nauseated despite the encouraging feedback. "Public speaking terrifies most people," Professor Iverson assured her afterward. "But you have something most speakers don't: genuine expertise and passion for your subject. Trust that, and the rest will follow." The week before the conference brought unexpected news. Hazel's mother had been approved for a weekend pass from the hospital, allowing her to spend 2 nights at home before returning for the continuation of her treatment. The timing couldn't have been better. She would be home the weekend before Hazel left for Chicago, giving them precious time together after months apart. The reunion was both joyful and bittersweet. Her mother arrived by medical transport, thinner than Hazel remembered, her once vibrant face pale and drawn from months of aggressive treatment. But her eyes still sparkled with the same intelligence and humor that Hazel had inherited, and her embrace was as fierce as ever. "Look at you," she said, holding Hazel at arm's length to study her. "Growing up while I wasn't looking, and becoming quite the revolutionary, from what I hear." They spent the weekend in quiet celebration. 3 generations of Kowalski women gathered around their small kitchen table, sharing stories, dreams, and simple, nourishing food. Hazel's mother listened intently as she described her work with Professor Iverson, her involvement with Dr. Thompson's initiative, and her upcoming presentation in Chicago. "I always knew you were destined for extraordinary things," her mother said, her voice soft with pride and a hint of regret for the milestones she had missed. "But I never imagined they would begin so soon." On Sunday evening, as the medical transport prepared to take her mother back to the hospital, Hazel felt a surge of panic. "Maybe I shouldn't go to Chicago," she blurted out. "It's too far, and with your treatment—" Her mother silenced her with a gentle finger to her lips. "Hazel Kowalski, do not dare to use me as an excuse for fear. Yes, I wish I could be there to see you shine on that stage. But knowing you are there, representing not just yourself but the potential of all children who have been overlooked and underestimated, that gives me more strength than any treatment ever could." She pressed something into Hazel's hand, a chapawa, small worn notebook with a leather cover. "Your grandfather's. He used it to jot down ideas that came to him in odd moments. I think he would want you to have it now." Hazel clutched the notebook to her chest, tears threatening. "I'll make you both proud." Her mother's smile was radiant despite her obvious fatigue. "You already have, my brilliant girl. You already have." The following Friday, Hazel found herself on a plane for the first time in her life, Professor Iverson beside her explaining the physics of flight to distract her from her nervousness. Chicago greeted them with a blast of windy cold as they exited the airport, the city's famous skyline, visible in the distance as their taxi navigated the busy streets. The conference hotel was grander than any building Hazel had ever entered, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers, with mathematicians from around the world gathered in the lobby and meeting rooms, speaking in a dozen different languages, yet united by their shared passion for numbers and patterns. Professor Iverson introduced Hazel to colleagues whose names she recognized from textbooks and journal articles. To Hazel's surprise, they treated her not as a child, but as a fellow mathematician, discussing her approach to the unsolved problem, with genuine interest and respect. "You see," Professor Iverson murmured as they headed to their rooms after a welcome reception, "in the world of mathematics, age matters far less than insight. You belong here, Hazel." That night, Alone in a hotel room that seemed impossibly luxurious compared to her cramped bedroom at home, Hazel opened her grandfather's notebook. Its pages were filled with mathematical notations, yes, but also with observations about life, about patterns in nature, about the connections between seemingly disparate concepts. On the final page, in his precise handwriting, was a quote that made her breath catch. "Mathematics, rightly viewed, possesses not only truth but supreme beauty, a beauty cold and austere, like that of sculpture, without appeal to any part of our weaker nature, without the gorgeous trappings of painting or music, yet sublimely pure and capable of a stern perfection such as only the greatest art can show." Bertrand Russell. Beneath it, her grandfather had added his own thoughts, "But the greatest beauty comes when we use this perfect tool to address imperfect human problems. Then mathematics transcends beauty to achieve something rarer still, compassion." The next morning, as Hazel stood backstage waiting for her introduction, those words echoed in her mind. Her presentation wasn't just about an interesting approach to an unsolved problem. It was about using the perfect language of mathematics to address the messy, complex challenges of human systems. When the moderator called her name, Hazel walked onto the stage with her grandfather's notebook clutched in one hand. The audience, hundreds of mathematicians and educators, fell silent as this small, serious girl with worn shoes and determination in her eyes took her place at the podium. "My name is Hazel Kowalski," she began, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "I'm 11 years old, and I believe mathematics can change more than equations. I believe it can change lives." For the next 30 minutes, she guided her audience through her work, explaining not just the mathematical principles involved, but the potential applications, how the same approach might be used to analyze educational systems, to identify points of failure and opportunities for intervention. As she spoke, she saw understanding dawn on faces throughout the audience. These weren't just abstract mathematical concepts. They were tools that could shape policy, reform institutions, and create more equitable systems for all. When she finished, the applause was immediate and thunderous. Questions followed, thoughtful and challenging, which Hazel answered with growing confidence. And afterward, a line of mathematicians, educators, and industry representatives formed, each wanting to speak with her, to offer resources, mentorship opportunities. One woman in particular, Dr. Eleanor Hughes from the National Science Foundation, spoke with both Hazel and Professor Iverson at length. "We have a special grant program," she explained, "for exceptional talents from underrepresented backgrounds. It provides not just educational funding, but family support, healthcare supplements, housing assistance, whatever is needed to ensure that financial concerns don't limit potential." Hazel's heart raced at the implications. "Healthcare supplements for family members too?" Dr. Hughes nodded. "The program recognizes that brilliant minds often come in packages with complex life situations. Nurturing talent means supporting the whole family unit." That night, Hazel called home from her hotel room, barely able to contain her excitement as she described the day's events to her grandmother and the potential NSF grant opportunity. "This could help Mama," she explained, her words tumbling over each other. "The experimental treatments that insurance won't cover, this program might help pay for them." Her grandmother's voice, though crackly over the long-distance line, carried clear joy. "See? This is why you had to go. Why you have to keep going forward, not held back by worry for us. Your light shines, and it illuminates paths for us all." When Hazel returned home, she found changes waiting. Her mother's doctors reported unexpected improvement, enough that they were cautiously optimistic about her eventual recovery. The Educational Equity Initiative had secured additional funding based partly on the innovative Student Advisory Council model, and a letter waited from the National Science Foundation, confirming Hazel's acceptance into their special grant program, with specific provisions for her mother's medical expenses and her grandmother's supportive care. Life didn't transform overnight. Challenges remained. Her mother's health was still fragile, their financial situation still precarious, and the systems Hazel sought to change still resistant to rapid reform. But the trajectory had shifted. Doors that had seemed permanently closed now stood ajar, offering glimpses of possibilities that once existed only in dreams. As spring turned to summer, Hazel prepared for the intensive program she'd been accepted 2 months earlier. Isaac and the other members of their study group continued meeting, now officially recognized as the Student Advisory Council for Dr. Thompson's initiative. Professor Iverson mentored Hazel through increasingly advanced mathematical concepts while encouraging her growing interest in systems theory and applied solutions. And in courthouses across the county, a new protocol was implemented, one requiring thorough investigation before accusations against students could proceed, with special attention to potential gifted behaviors that might be misinterpreted as problematic. The protocol was informally known among court staff as the Kowalski Standard. One warm evening, as Hazel and her grandmother sat on the small balcony of their apartment, watching the sunset paint the city in gold and crimson, the old woman asked a question that had been on her mind. "Are you still angry, Hazel, about what happened with the principal, the police, the judge?" Hazel considered carefully before answering. "Not angry, exactly. I haven't forgotten. I don't think I ever will. But now I understand that what happened to me happens to many children, some with the resilience or resources to overcome it, others who are permanently derailed." She watched a flock of birds wheel against the darkening sky, their movements creating patterns only visible when viewed as a whole rather than as individual trajectories. "The systems failed," she continued, "but systems can be redesigned, improved, made more just. I think that's what I'm meant to do, use the abilities I've been given not just to solve abstract problems, but to fix broken systems." Her grandmother nodded, her lined face peaceful in the fading light. "Your grandfather used to say that true. Genius isn't just seeing what others cannot, it's helping others to see it too. You are showing people new possibilities, new ways of thinking about old problems." As darkness fell, bringing with it the first stars of evening, Hazel thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a humiliated child in a courtroom to a young mathematician with growing influence and purpose. The path had not been easy or straight, marked by hardship and injustice that no child should endure. Yet those very challenges had forged in her a determination not just to succeed personally, but to create success pathways for others like her. To build bridges between the world of pure intellectual achievement and the messy reality of human systems, with all their flaws and biases. In the years that followed, Hazel Kowalski would become known not just for her mathematical brilliance, but for her revolutionary approach to educational reform, for programs that identified and nurtured unconventional talents, and for policy changes that made justice systems more equitable for all children. She would remember always the cold courtroom, the judge's skeptical gaze, the moment when everything could have been lost, if not for her courage to stand up and demonstrate her true abilities. That memory would fuel her work, her advocacy, her determination to ensure that no other child had to prove their worth in such circumstances. But she would also remember the turning points, Professor Iverson's mentorship, Dr. Thompson's belief in her vision, the community of different thinkers who had shown her the power of diverse perspectives united in common purpose. Above all, she would remember her grandfather's words, discovered in that worn notebook on the eve of her first public triumph, that the greatest beauty of mathematics lies not in its abstract perfection, but in its application to human problems. That when precisely defined patterns meet messy reality, true transformation becomes possible. And in that intersection, between rigor and compassion, between individual brilliance and collective well-being, Hazel Kowalski would find her life's work and her greatest joy. Have you ever felt misunderstood for being different or passionate about something others didn't value? I'd love to hear your experience in the comments. As the years passed, Hazel's influence grew exponentially. By 14, she had published her first paper in a peer-reviewed mathematical journal. By 16, she was dividing her time between advanced university studies and her increasingly influential role in educational policy development. Her mother's health had stabilized, allowing her to return home, where she became an active partner. In Hazel's work, using her own experience as a patient to help redesign healthcare systems for better accessibility and family support. The Student Advisory Council that had begun as an informal study group expanded into a national network of youth advisors, their insights shaping educational reforms in districts across the country. Isaac, whose literary brilliance had blossomed, alongside his friendship with Hazel, became a powerful advocate for humanities education that embraced diverse thinking styles. On Hazel's 18th birthday, a letter arrived from Judge Thompson, who had followed her progress with interest. Over the years, 7 years ago, he wrote, "You stood in my courtroom and showed me the error of my assumptions. Since then, I have watched you transform not just your own life, but the lives of countless others. You have my deepest admiration, and, if you will, accept it. My apology for not recognizing immediately what stood before me. Not just a brilliant mind, but a courageous spirit, determined to bend the arc of justice toward fairness for all." Hazel read the letter with a complex mixture of emotions. The judge's words acknowledged a truth she had come to understand herself, that her greatest contribution would never be a mathematical theorem or an elegant proof, but the application of her analytical skills to the messy, vital work of reforming human systems. That evening, as she celebrated with her family and the close circle of friends who had supported her journey, Hazel reflected on the path that had brought her here. The false accusation that might have crushed her spirit had instead ignited a determination not just to succeed individually, but to create a world where brilliance in all its forms could be recognized and nurtured, regardless of packaging. 2 patterns, she proposed, raising her glass in a toast. Both those we discover and those we create. Around the table sat the people who had helped her see that the most important patterns weren't found in mathematics at all, but in human connections, in the way one person's belief could spark another's courage, in how injustice recognized could fuel the fire of positive change, in the power of diverse minds united by common purpose. In that moment, surrounded by love and purpose, Hazel Kowalski knew with certainty that her greatest theorems were yet to come, not written in the abstract language of pure mathematics, but in the transformed lives of children who would never know the cold fear of standing alone against a system that failed to see their potential. And in that knowledge, she found a satisfaction deeper than any equation could express, the profound joy of a life aligned with purpose, of a mind that had found its true calling not despite adversity, but because of it. What new challenges await Hazel as her influence continues to grow? Will the systems she's working to change resist her revolutionary ideas, or will they embrace the brilliance of this once humiliated child who now stands as a beacon of possibility for overlooked geniuses everywhere? 20 years later, Dr. Hazel Kowalski stood before a different audience, the United Nations Educational Council, where representatives from countries around the world had gathered to discuss the future of global education. Her reputation preceded her, the prodigy who had grown into one of the world's leading voices on educational reform, whose mathematics-based approach to systems redesign had transformed schools, courts, and children's services across America and beyond. "The greatest waste of human potential," she told the assembled dignitaries, "is our failure to recognize intelligence that doesn't fit our predetermined patterns. Every child who is labeled disruptive rather than creative, defiant rather than independent, or slow rather than thoughtful, represents a loss not just for that child, but for our collective future." From the back of the hall, Hazel could see her mother and grandmother, now in her 80s but still remarkably vital, watching with proud smiles. Beside them sat Isaac, now Dr. Reynolds, whose groundbreaking work on narrative cognition complemented Hazel's more analytical approach. Their collaboration had produced educational models that honored multiple forms of intelligence, creating pathways to success for children whose minds worked in ways traditional systems had failed to value. As she concluded her address, outlining the global initiative she proposed, a network of identification and support programs designed to nurture unconventional talents in underserved communities worldwide, Hazel reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought of Ms. Zweller, whose jealousy and prejudice had nearly derailed her future, but who had inadvertently set her on this path of advocacy and reform. The former principal, Hazel had learned, had eventually left education entirely, unable to adapt to the more inclusive, evidence-based approaches that Hazel's work had helped to establish as the new standard. She thought of Judge Thompson, who had overcome his initial skepticism to become one of her strongest allies, using his position to implement reforms that made the juvenile justice system more responsive to the needs of exceptional children. Now retired, he served on the board of the Kowalski Foundation, the organization Hazel had established to support gifted children from disadvantaged backgrounds. Most of all, she thought of the thousands of children whose lives had been touched by the programs she'd helped create, children like her younger self, whose extraordinary minds might once have been dismissed as troublesome or deceitful, but who now found pathways designed to nurture their unique gifts. As the council voted unanimously to adopt her proposal, committing resources to implement her model globally, Hazel felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun in humiliation and fear in that long-ago courtroom had transformed into something powerful and positive, a force for change that would outlast her own lifetime. Later that evening, at a small celebration with her closest supporters, Hazel was approached by a young girl, perhaps 11 or 12, whose parents had brought her to the reception. The child's serious eyes and tentative demeanor reminded Hazel powerfully of herself at that age. "Dr. Kowalski," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper, "my teacher gave us your story to read, about what happened when you were my age, and how you changed things afterward." Hazel smiled encouragingly. "And what did you think?" I thought maybe I'm not broken after all. Maybe I just think differently." The girl's voice grew stronger. "I want to do what you did. Make systems better, I mean. Not just for math and science like you, but for art and music too, because those matter just as much, don't they?" Hazel knelt to meet the girl at eye level, touched by the familiar mixture of uncertainty and determination in her expression. "They absolutely do. The world needs all kinds of minds, mathematical, artistic, musical, literary, working together to solve our biggest challenges." "But how did you know what to do?" the girl asked. "How did you not give up when people didn't believe in you?" Hazel considered the question carefully. "I had people who did believe in me. My grandmother, my mother, teachers like Mrs. Wilson, and Professor Iverson. And I learned that systems can change, but only if someone is brave enough to show what's possible." She took the girl's hand in her own. "What's your name?" "Lily," the girl replied. "Lily Chen. Well, Lily Chen, remember this. The very thing that makes you feel different now, that makes some people misunderstand you, that's your greatest strength. Guard it, develop it, and then use it to make the world better for others like you." As Lily's parents led her away, Hazel watched the girl go with a sense of recognition and hope. Another different thinker finding her way, another mind that wouldn't be constrained by systems designed for conformity rather than creativity. Isaac approached, handing Hazel a glass of champagne. "You've created quite a legacy, you know. That girl could be you 30 years ago." "With one critical difference," Hazel replied. "She won't have to stand alone in a courtroom to prove her worth. She'll have pathways we've built, supporters we've trained, systems we've redesigned. And yet there will always be new challenges, new barriers," Isaac observed, "new systems that need reimagining." Hazel nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Which is why our work is never finished. Each generation builds on what came before, reaching further, seeing deeper." Later that night, back in her hotel room, Hazel opened the worn leather notebook that had once belonged to her grandfather. Over the years, she had filled its remaining pages with her own observations, theorems, and reflections, creating a dialogue across time with the grandfather she had lost too soon. On the final page, beneath her most recent notes, she wrote, "The true measure of a system's success is not how well it serves those who fit neatly within its parameters, but how effectively it recognizes, nurtures, and elevates those who challenge its boundaries. For it is from these boundary challenges that true innovation springs, not just in mathematics or science or art, but in our very conception of what is possible." As she closed the notebook, Hazel thought of all the children like Lily, like her younger self, whose brilliant minds worked in ways that systems struggled to categorize or contain. Her life's work had been to create space for these children, to flourish, to transform the very structures that had once nearly crushed her own potential. The humiliation of that long-ago courtroom had become the foundation of her purpose, a purpose that had not only changed her own life, but had rippled outward to touch countless others. From adversity had come not just personal triumph, but systemic transformation, proving that sometimes the greatest contributions come from those the world is quickest to dismiss. And in that realization lay perhaps the most important lesson of all, that a single mind awakened to its own power and purpose could indeed change the world, not despite the obstacles placed in its path, but because of them, transformed through courage and vision into stepping stones toward a more just and generous future. The following morning, as Hazel prepared to address a group of education ministers eager to implement her models in their own countries, she received an unexpected message. A small school in her old neighborhood, the very school where Ms. Zweller had once called the police on an 11-year-old math prodigy, was being renamed. Its new name, the Hazel Kowalski Academy for Diverse Minds. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. The very institution that had once failed to recognize her gifts would now be dedicated to nurturing children whose brilliance manifested in unconventional ways. It was a testimony to how far she had come and how far society had come with her, though she knew better than most how much work remained to be done. As she stepped onto the stage to continue spreading her vision of educational systems that embraced rather than feared difference, Hazel carried with her the memory of that frightened girl in worn shoes standing before a skeptical judge with nothing but her brilliant mind as defense. That girl had forever changed the woman Hazel had become, and through her had begun to change the world itself. What new breakthrough would transform the next child's life? What brilliant mind was even now being overlooked in a classroom somewhere, waiting for the chance to show what it could contribute? These were the questions that drove her forward, the mission that gave meaning to the mathematical gift she had been born with, and the courage she had developed through adversity. For Hazel Kowalski, once humiliated in a courtroom by those who failed to see her genius, the equation was finally balanced. Justice, slow but certain, had prevailed. And in its wake came opportunity, not just for her, but for generations of different thinkers who would never have to prove their worth the way she once did. That, she knew, was her true legacy, not the awards or the recognition or even the global initiatives that bore her name, but the children who would never know, the fear she had known because the systems around them had been redesigned to recognize and nurture their unique brilliance from the start. And in that knowledge, Hazel found the greatest satisfaction of all, the deep, abiding joy of a life whose purpose had transformed struggle into strength, humiliation into hope, and individual genius into collective good. What powerful narrative hook will reveal itself as Hazel's global educational initiatives take root in countries with vastly different cultural contexts and resources? How will her approach to recognizing diverse forms of intelligence reshape societies that have long privileged certain types of thinking over others? 15 years later, as Hazel approached her 50th birthday, the seeds she had planted across the globe had grown into a forest of change. The educational models she had designed had been adapted to cultural contexts from rural India to urban Brazil, creating identification and support systems for children whose gifts might otherwise have gone unrecognized. In a remote village in Kenya, a teenage girl whose mathematical intuition rivaled Hazel's own was developing sustainable water systems using principles of fluid dynamics she had taught herself from borrowed textbooks. In a crowded neighborhood in Manila, a boy whose spatial reasoning abilities had once been mistaken for daydreaming was now leading an urban design initiative that transformed cramped living spaces into efficient, beautiful environments. In countless communities around the world, children who might once have been labeled disruptive, disobedient, or deficient were now recognized as the innovators and problem solvers they truly were. Not all the changes had come easily. Traditional educational systems resisted reform, bureaucracies moved slowly, and cultural preconceptions about intelligence and giftedness proved stubbornly persistent. But year by year, community by community, the needle moved toward greater recognition of diverse cognitive styles and talents. The Kowalski Foundation, now an international presence with offices in 12 countries, provided not just educational support but comprehensive family services, ensuring that brilliant children from disadvantaged backgrounds had the stability and resources they needed to develop their potential fully. The Foundation's scholarship programs had sent hundreds of exceptional students to universities around the world, creating a new generation of leaders committed to continuing Hazel's work. On a crisp autumn morning, Hazel stood before the newly constructed Global Center for Educational Innovation, a state-of-the-art research and training facility dedicated to studying and supporting diverse cognitive styles. Funded by an international consortium of governments, corporations, and philanthropic organizations, the center represented the institutionalization of principles Hazel had championed for decades. As she cut the ribbon to officially open the facility, Hazel thought of her grandmother, who had passed away peacefully 5 years earlier at the age of 93, having lived to see her granddaughter's vision transform educational systems around the world. She thought of her mother, now in her 70s but still actively involved in the Foundation's healthcare initiatives, using her own experience as a patient to improve medical systems for all families. And she thought of Judge Thompson, who had died the previous year, leaving behind a legacy of juvenile justice reform that paralleled and complemented her own work in education. At his memorial service, his son Isaac, now a distinguished professor of cognitive linguistics and Hazel's closest friend and collaborator, had spoken movingly of his father's evolution from a judge bound by traditional thinking to an advocate for systems that recognized the potential in every child who came before the court. The center bustled with researchers, educators, and policymakers from dozens of countries, all committed to the principle that had guided Hazel's life: that true intelligence comes in countless forms, all of them valuable, all of them necessary to address the complex challenges facing humanity. Among them were many Hazel's children, as they called themselves, former recipients of Foundation support who had gone on to become leaders in their fields, each carrying forward the mission in their own way. That evening, at a quiet dinner, with close friends and colleagues, Hazel was surprised by the arrival of a special guest, Lily Chen, the young girl she had met at the UN reception 15 years earlier. Now a poised young woman in her late 20s, Lily had become an acclaimed composer whose work bridged traditional Chinese music with cutting-edge digital composition, creating soundscapes that critics described as mathematics for the ears. "I've been following your work for years," Hazel told her warmly. "Your recent symphony about climate patterns was extraordinary, translating data into emotion in a way that reaches people far more effectively than charts and graphs ever could." Lily smiled, her confidence a world away from the uncertain child Hazel had first met. "That's what I wanted to tell you. What you said to me that night, about different kinds of minds working together, it shaped everything I've done since. I realized my way of thinking wasn't wrong, just different, and that difference had value." "That realization is powerful," Hazel agreed. "It's what changes lives." "Not just lives," Lily corrected gently. "Systems. That's what I learned from studying your work. Individual transformation is just the beginning. The real power comes when we redesign the systems themselves." As the evening progressed, Lily shared her own initiative, a program that identified children with exceptional auditory processing and musical intuition in underserved communities, providing them with both musical education and opportunities to apply their unique cognitive styles to challenges ranging from urban soundscape design to medical diagnostic technologies that utilized sound patterns. "We're calling it the Diverse Minds Music Initiative," Lily explained. "With your permission, of course." Hazel felt a profound sense of completion as she listened. Here was the next generation taking her foundational work and extending it in directions she hadn't imagined, applying the core principles to domains beyond her own expertise. This was how lasting change happened, not through a single visionary, but through a relay race of inspired minds, each passing the baton to those who would carry it further. "You have more than my permission," Hazel told her. "You have my gratitude." This is exactly what I hoped would happen, that others would take these ideas and apply them in their own spheres, creating a network of approaches that recognize and nurture all forms of human potential. Later that night, as she prepared for Bed in her hotel room, Hazel received a video call from her mother. Though slowed by age, Elena Kowalski remained a force of nature, her mind as sharp as ever. "I saw the opening ceremony online," her mother said without preamble. "Your grandfather would have been so proud, not just of what you've accomplished, but of how you've accomplished it, by bringing others along with you, by creating systems that will outlast us all." "I was thinking of him today," Hazel admitted, "and of you and Babsia. How much your belief in me mattered when it seemed like the world was determined to put me in a box I didn't fit." Her mother's eyes softened with emotion. "We believed because we saw. Others didn't look closely enough. They saw what they expected to see, a poor girl in worn shoes, not a mind that could change the world." "And now?" Hazel asked. "Now you've made it impossible not to see," her mother replied simply. "You've changed the lens through which we view potential." After ending the call, Hazel sat for a long time at the window of her hotel room, looking out at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, she knew, were children, whose brilliant minds were even now being underestimated, whose unique ways of thinking were being misinterpreted as deficits rather than differences. Despite all the progress, there was still so much work to be done. But she also knew that the work would continue, carried forward by the global network of different thinkers she had helped to connect and empower. The lonely battle she had once fought in a cold courtroom had become a worldwide movement for recognition and inclusion, a movement that gained momentum with each mind, it freed to reach its full potential. As Hazel finally prepared for sleep, she remembered something her grandmother had told her long ago, on the night before she left for that first mathematics conference in Chicago. "In life, opportunities knock only so many times before they move. On to another door. When they knock for you, my brilliant girl, you must answer." She had answered that knock, and then another and another after that. And in doing so, she had opened doors not just for herself but for countless others, whose gifts might otherwise have remained hidden behind walls of misunderstanding and prejudice. That, Hazel knew, was her true legacy, not just the programs, or the policies, or even the principles she had championed, but the culture change they had collectively created. A world that increasingly valued cognitive diversity not as a problem to be managed, but as an asset to be nurtured. A world where different wasn't lesser but essential, where the unique patterns each mind perceived could contribute to the complex tapestry of human understanding. As she drifted toward sleep, Hazel's thoughts returned to that pivotal moment in the courtroom when a frightened girl had found the courage to demonstrate her abilities rather than accept the judgment of those who had failed to see her potential. In that moment of crisis had been born a purpose that had guided her life ever since, to ensure that no other child had to prove their worth in such circumstances, that the systems themselves would be redesigned to recognize and nurture the full spectrum of human brilliance. It was a purpose she had fulfilled beyond her wildest childhood dreams. And yet, as Hazel knew better than most, there would always be new frontiers of understanding, new forms of intelligence to recognize, new systems to reimagine. The work would continue, generation after generation, each building on what came, before reaching ever closer to a world where every mind could flourish. And in that knowledge, as she slipped into dreams, filled with elegant equations and transformed lives, Hazel Kowalski found peace, the deep, abiding peace of a life lived in perfect alignment with its highest purpose. As Hazel's impact continues to ripple across generations and continents, what new challenges will emerge in a world where artificial intelligence and technological advances are rapidly redefining our understanding of cognition itself? How will her legacy adapt to these unprecedented frontiers of human and machine intelligence? On the morning of her 70th birthday, Hazel woke early in the modest apartment she had maintained despite her success and international recognition. The walls were lined with bookshelves housing her extensive mathematical library, interspersed with photographs documenting a life of purpose. Hazel with her mother and grandmother, with Isaac and their global network of colleagues, with generations of different thinkers whose lives had been touched by her work. The world had changed dramatically in the decades since that pivotal moment in the courtroom. Artificial intelligence had transformed nearly every aspect of human life, from education to healthcare to governance. Virtual reality environments, created customized learning experiences for children with diverse cognitive styles. Neuroscience had advanced to the point where brain development could be monitored and supported in ways that once seemed like science fiction. These technological leaps had created both opportunities and challenges for Hazel's lifelong mission. On one hand, advanced educational technologies could adapt to individual learning styles with unprecedented precision, offering personalized pathways that traditional classroom structures never could. On the other hand, the designers of these systems often embedded unconscious biases into their algorithms, creating new forms of exclusion for children whose minds worked in unexpected ways. Hazel had spent the last decade of her career addressing this frontier, ensuring that the principles of cognitive diversity she had championed were integrated into the development of educational AI systems worldwide. Her mathematical background, combined with her deep understanding of diverse thinking styles, made her uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between technology developers and educational theorists. As she prepared for the day ahead, Hazel reviewed the agenda for the International Conference on Cognitive Diversity and Artificial Intelligence that would begin tomorrow, a gathering she had helped organize to address the complex, ethical, and practical questions raised by increasingly intelligent learning systems. Experts from fields ranging from neuroscience to computer engineering to philosophy would come together to ensure that technological progress enhanced rather than limited the development of diverse human potential. A notification on her tablet reminded her of today's more personal celebration, a small gathering of family and close colleagues at the Hazel Kowalski Academy for Diverse Minds, the renamed school that had once been the site of her greatest humiliation and was now a globally recognized center for innovative educational practices. As she dressed, selecting comfortable but elegant clothes that reflected her practical nature, Hazel thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The path from that frightened 11-year-old to international educational reformer had not been straight or easy. There had been setbacks, resistances, moments of doubt and exhaustion, but through it all the core purpose had remained constant: to create systems that recognized and nurtured the full spectrum of human cognitive gifts. The Academy had become a living laboratory for these principles, with students whose minds represented extraordinary diversity in how they processed information, solved problems, and created new knowledge. Traditional measures of intelligence had been replaced by multidimensional assessments that recognized spatial, emotional, kinesthetic, and countless other forms of cognitive strength. Children who might once have been labeled as problematic were now understood as bringing invaluable perspectives that enriched the learning community. Hazel arrived at the academy to find the central courtyard transformed for the celebration. Former students, now doctors, artists, engineers, teachers, and leaders in countless fields, mingled with current faculty and Hazel's closest colleagues. At the center stood her mother, now in her 90s, but still remarkably sharp, holding court from her wheelchair as she shared stories with a circle of entranced listeners. Isaac Reynolds approached, his hair now white, but his eyes still bright with the literary intelligence that had complemented Hazel's mathematical mind throughout. Their decades of collaboration, 70 years, he said, embracing her warmly. Who would have thought that frightened girl and boy would change global education? Not just us, Hazel corrected gently. All of them. She gestured to the gathering, to the generations of different thinkers who had carried the work forward in ways neither of them could have imagined. The formal program began with brief speeches honoring Hazel's contributions, but the highlight came when a group of current Academy students presented their latest project, an AI system they had programmed themselves, designed specifically to identify and nurture cognitive styles that traditional educational methods often missed. "We call it the Kowalski Recognition Protocol," explained May, a 16-year-old whose unique cognitive architecture allowed her to perceive patterns across seemingly unrelated domains. It doesn't just adapt to how students think. It actively looks for unexplored cognitive pathways that might represent new forms of intelligence we haven't even recognized yet. As the students demonstrated their creation, Hazel felt a profound sense of the torch being passed. These young people weren't just implementing her ideas, they were extending them in directions she hadn't imagined, using technologies that hadn't existed when she began her work. They were ensuring that the principles of cognitive diversity would evolve to meet the challenges of a rapidly changing world. After the presentation, as guests enjoyed refreshments in the courtyard, Hazel found herself approached by a dignified older woman whose face seemed vaguely familiar. "Dr. Kowalski," the woman began hesitantly. "I don't know if you remember me. It's been many years." Hazel studied her, searching her memory. Then recognition dawned. "Ms. Zweller." The former principal nodded, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. "I've wanted to speak with you for a long time, but never found the courage. Today, seeing all that has grown from what happened, I felt I had to come." Hazel indicated a quiet bench at the edge of the courtyard, and they sat together. The woman who had once called the police on an 11-year-old girl and the international educational reformer that girl had become. "I was wrong," Miss Zweller said simply. "Not just about you, but about so many children. I operated from fear and insecurity, protecting a system I thought was right because it was the only one I knew." Hazel nodded, neither dismissing the apology nor rushing to offer easy absolution. "What happened afterward?" she asked instead. "After you left Lincoln Middle School?" Miss Zweller sighed. "I left education entirely for a time, worked in administration for a shipping company, but I couldn't stay away. I went back to school, studied special education with a focus on twice exceptional children. Spent the last 20 years of my career trying to identify and support students whose gifts were masked by challenges, trying in my own small way to undo some of the harm I'd done." "That's more than I expected," Hazel admitted. "Your work forced many of us to confront our biases," Miss Zweller continued, "to question systems we had taken for granted. Some, like me, changed course, others resisted. But none of us could ignore the questions you raised." As they spoke, Hazel realized she felt neither anger nor triumph, but something more complex, a recognition that systems change when people change, and that transformation often begins with the acknowledgement of error. Ms. Zweller's journey from rigid enforcer of flawed systems to advocate for overlooked students was, in its way, as important as Hazel's own path from victim to reformer. "Thank you for telling me this," Hazel said finally. "It matters that people can change, that systems can evolve. That's always been at the heart of my work." As the celebration continued around them, Hazel found herself drawn into conversations with former students, colleagues, and family members, each sharing stories of how the principles she had championed had transformed individual lives and institutional practices. Young researchers described new frontiers in understanding neurodiversity. Educators from around the world reported on adaptations of her models to their cultural contexts. Parents spoke movingly of children whose unique gifts had been recognized, rather than repressed. Late in the afternoon, as the gathering began to disperse, Hazel's mother asked to speak with her privately. They moved to a quiet classroom, where Eleanor Kowalski took her daughter's hands in her own weathered ones. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice steady despite her advanced age. "Something I should have shared long ago." She explained that Hazel's father, who had disappeared when she was a toddler, leaving only the ghost of a smile in her memory, had not abandoned them willingly. He had been a mathematician himself, brilliant but troubled, whose undiagnosed neurodivergence had made it impossible for him to navigate the social and professional expectations of his time. The patterns in his mind were beautiful, but chaotic. Elena explained. He saw connections others couldn't follow, spoke in equations when words failed him. The university called it a breakdown when he couldn't explain his work in ways they understood. He left because he believed we would be better without the burden of his difference. Hazel sat very still, absorbing this revelation. "Why tell me? Now?" "Because today, celebrating all you've accomplished, I realize that you completed his work without even knowing it existed. You created the world he needed, one that recognizes many forms of brilliance, that doesn't demand conformity as the price of belonging." As the implications of her mother's words sank in, Hazel felt a new dimension added to her life's purpose. All these years, without knowing it, she had been building systems that might have recognized and supported her father's unique mind. The personal and the universal had been intertwined all along, her individual story part of a larger human narrative about difference, recognition, and belonging. That night, back in her apartment, Hazel opened her grandfather's notebook for the first time in many years. Its pages, filled first with his mathematical notations and later with her own, represented a dialogue across generations, a shared commitment to using the precise language of mathematics to address the messy complexities of human experience. On a fresh page, Hazel began to write. Not equations this time, but reflections on the day's revelations and the journey that had brought her to this moment. She wrote about systems and individuals, about how institutional change and personal transformation intertwined, about the countless minds that had contributed to the movement she had helped to catalyze. And she wrote about the future, about the challenges that new technologies presented, about the continuing need to recognize forms of intelligence that didn't fit existing categories, about her hope that the principles of cognitive diversity would evolve to meet the needs of generations not yet born. As she wrote, Hazel felt a profound sense of both completion and continuation. The work she had begun would never be finished. There would always be new frontiers of understanding, new forms of exclusion to address, new potentials to recognize. But the foundation had been laid, the direction established, the momentum created. Others would carry it forward in ways she couldn't predict, but could trust would honor the core commitment to recognizing and nurturing the full spectrum of human cognitive gifts. In that knowledge, as she closed the notebook and prepared for tomorrow's conference, Hazel Kowalski found not just satisfaction, but anticipation, eager, even at 70, to continue exploring the frontiers of human potential, to keep expanding the definition of intelligence, to ensure that no child's brilliant mind would ever again be dismissed or diminished for being different. For in the end, that was her most profound insight and her most lasting legacy, that difference itself is the source of our greatest innovations, that the minds that don't fit are precisely the ones we most need, and that a world that embraces cognitive diversity is not just more just, but more capable of addressing the complex challenges that face us all. Congratulations. Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.